Modern DevOps with Emily Freeman.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your humble host, and make sure to check out www.azuredevops.show for past episodes and show notes. We're here on the show where we want you to move fast and increase quality and ship well. And my guest today is Emily Freeman. You can find her online at emilyfreeman.io and in Denver, Colorado in real life. And her most recent book is DevOps for Dummies. You can find that anywhere books are sold. And she leads the modern operations team in cloud advocacy at Microsoft. And she speaks all the time at conferences and actually is available for accepting speaking requests if you go to her website. And so I'm really excited for this conversation. Emily, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm excited. And I just read a little bit of what you've posted online about your experience with the book and how it was a marathon. But it's exciting to finally you finish the book. But I'd love to talk about it and what people can expect from it.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was an incredible accomplishment, I think, just personally, actually getting it done. When I first started out, Chad Fowler, who I reported to briefly in advocacy, he had this great point. He was like, well, you need to finish it because if you don't finish it, none of this counts.
Right.
And that sort of carried me through, which I'm appreciative of.
Now, you're at Microsoft. You've done lots of things in your career. For people who haven't seen you speak or aren't familiar with you, how did you? What's your journey been, and how did you end up in this part of Microsoft?
Yeah, so I have a non-traditional journey into tech. I went to school for political science, and I worked in PR, did fundraising for a little bit. And then I sort of had a slightly older than quarter life crisis after I had my daughter. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, I need a change. And where should I go? And I looked at software engineering. I was like, well, how hard can it be?
Oh, come on. How hard?
Turns out kind of hard, But yeah, so I ended up going to a code school out here in Denver. That's how I ended up here because I was living in DC before, and learned Ruby, worked in Java for a little bit, which I learned to love. And then kind of fell into DevOps through my own frustrations, working as a developer on a team, and then got lucky enough to find developer advocacy, which suits me quite well because I love writing and I love speaking, and I kind of get to merge both my worlds.
Well, that makes a lot of sense because I imagine in political fundraising, you have to talk to a lot of people and be comfortable doing that.
That's true. You also have to get comfortable having people say no to you for repeatedly.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, that's true. That's probably true of any flavor of sales.
It is. Yeah. Well, and I think any flavor of anything, right? Like if you want to get further in your career or your life, you have to be willing to ask people and risk having them say no. But if you don't ask, it's always going to be no, you know?
Yeah. Now, your book is titled DevOps for Dummies. And so what was your strategy when you were starting to frame it out and figure an audience and say, it's DevOps for Dummies. It's not the DevOps for the people who already know what they're doing.
Yeah.
What was what things did you put in the book specifically to target the entry level or the newcomer to DevOps?
Yeah, so this took a lot of time and thought because I think in tech it's very common for all of us to have this need to sort of prove that we're smart and we're worthy and we know what we're talking about. And in doing so, we sort of cheat ourselves and others of covering the sort of beginner, really friendly, generic version of any topic, right? And so I wanted DevOps for Dummies, obviously, to be both welcoming and palatable for someone who is not familiar at all with the concept, but also work for someone who is, somewhere along that DevOps journey, and have them be able to sort of jump in to where they're at and proceed from there. So yes, setting it up was really difficult, but what I landed on was, okay, what would a CIO of a small insurance company out of Hartford, Connecticut need from DevOps, because I think it's really easy to talk about the sort of hand wavy parts of DevOps. It's like, oh, it's greenfield. You have this VC funded SF startup. You can do whatever. It's much harder to take a company with 20 years of spaghetti code and, old infrastructure and different things at different stages, and kind of create a process for both the organization to change as a culture, but also for the tooling to adapt to, new and sometimes better alternatives than what they're currently working with.
Yeah, good point. Any company that's been doing software for a while has a system that's not using the most modern automation processes, and it's definitely not in the cloud.
Yeah. And that's okay, right? Like, I feel like sometimes we, especially I work for a cloud provider. So it's like, oh, well, you need to adopt public cloud or you need to adopt Kubernetes or whatever the hot thing is. And I think we need to sort of step back from that and just say, like, we're all solving problems and we all have different constraints and different resources. And so finding the best solution for your problem, your customer, your company, that takes thought. And if an older approach, an older architecture, an older tool is the best for the job, that's perfectly fine. If you want to slowly modernize, that's perfectly fine too. Just don't say you're going to rewrite your whole 20-year-old code base in a year, because that's not going to happen. Yeah. Don't torture people like that.
Yeah. The second system effect is an essay by Fred Brooks that I still remember back from the 90s. And yeah, he basically says, oh, everybody says, oh, we're going to do a next version of the system and it's going to be better. And invariably, the second system always fails.
Oh my God. Yeah. And it's hell getting there. Like I've done a rewrite, or I've attempted a rewrite with a team, and it is incredibly stressful. You run into all sorts of problems. You don't think about everything. Like, software is just hard, And so thinking that you can just rewrite something in a different language or take a monolith and make it a microservice, quickly, it's never going to happen. Right.
I think of absolutes. The rewrite is an absolute. And I've been in consulting my whole career, and it's we're gonna rewrite this thing. Our plan is to rewrite, and we need some help with such and such. And it's an absolute statement. But then you start asking the question, so do you need to replace everything? What do you mean? Well, let's take the structure of the tables in your database. Do we need to redesign those and replace them? Well, no. Okay, exactly. Well, let's talk architecture first. We call it to a web service to get credit checks or whatnot. Do we need to replace that? Well, no. And then it comes back where, okay, we don't actually need to start from scratch and replace everything. And then we can whittle back the mindset of we need to start over. It's like, no, hold on. Let's hone in on what's actually giving us problems.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree.
So, by the way, congratulations on the book. That's a monumental accomplishment. And I told you before the show started, I think you're going to write a new one. So I will say that again on the air. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah. No, I believe it. I have ideas knocking around my brain. So just trying to figure out one, when I have the energy again, I don't know about you, it zapped me. Like I am just empty. And so it's almost like, in order to write a book, you have to take a little piece of your soul and put it in there, and that costs. And so, I feel like I'm in a healing process, but once that's done, maybe. Yeah.
There's always the second edition. It's a little less effort than actually a new title.
Well, I tried to make DevOps for Dummies super evergreen. There's only 3 chapters that really talk about tech. And so, hopefully I don't have to do that, because that sounds extra irritating. Right.
Yeah. Well, so you're in the cloud advocacy area at Microsoft, but you came and you also did Ruby and Java. I'm just curious, what are the things that you found transferred completely over in the other tech stacks, and what was actually different when you're thinking about putting together a DevOps environment?
You mean from like a developer mindset over and thinking about DevOps from that perspective?
Right. What was really different, just because you're on a different computer language and different environment, and what's the same? Because I imagine there's got to be at least one thing that's the same. Yeah, no,
I think more tech is the same than we realize. And I'm not an expert in certain areas, but it seems to me at a high level that, a lot of times we're solving the same problems. We're just kind of using a different approach, or we're, trying to break it down in a different way. But I think for me, my bias is toward the human side of DevOps, or the human side of tech, as I like to say. And I think that is a constant. My whole theory is that our tech is evolving, but I think at this point we are the slow aspect of our work to evolve. Like humans just don't adapt as quickly as bits. And so as you're kind of proceeding, I think we end up being a lot of the bottlenecks, and unblocking those, I think, is fascinating.
Well, one of your talks, and I don't know if you talk about it in the book as well, but one of your conference talks is firefighting. And I gotta say, I've done a lot of firefighting in my career and witnessed a lot of firefighting. Do you have a solution for that?
So this is one of my favorite talks. And so it's putting out code fires, and it kind of compares DevOps to the approaches that actual like emergency workers go through. The one time I gave this talk, it was in DevOps Days, Indianapolis. And I was first up, and I get up to the mic and I say, so the dumpster is on fire again. And at that very moment, the fire alarm went off.
Oh, nice.
And that was my peak as a speaker. I'll never match that.
Did you literally have to drop the mic?
No, I was just like, what do we do now?
Evacuate?
Like, are we good? They came in very quickly and were like, it's a false alarm. You're fine.
Oh, good.
It's like, all right, that was interesting. Here we go. It just kind of talks about like how you can kind of look at an incident as the same as, how would firefighters approach a house fire? How would firefighters approach a forest fire? Because they have learned things over the decades and centuries, really. Rome is the first firefighters, though they were more like shaking down homeowners as their house burned. Kind of looking at like other industries and how they've solved problems. I think tech, we like to view ourselves as so clever, and we are an incredibly intelligent industry. But we're new, and I think if you can look at the older industries and apply the lessons they've learned to our work, we will be able to accelerate. Okay.
So is there a particular process that we can harvest from what they do, and what are the steps?
Yeah. So if they're approaching a fire, typically you have an incident commander, and you also have first responders, right? So you have the person who first came up on that. Typically, if an incident commander has not been established at that point, you are going to, like, the first responder is the incident commander until that person passes the torch perhaps to someone a little bit more experienced. And then another really interesting thing they do is they will call extra trucks, but they'll have them park like 2 blocks away. And so it limits the amount of people on scene and the amount of sort of communication pathways you have to deal with. Because there's this great formula for how many ways you can communicate within a group. That's in one of my other talks, and we can post it in the notes. But basically, like, as you expand out, like 100 people, if you have a group of 100 people, it's almost 5,000 communication pathways. And so, yeah, you can imagine, like, as there's more and more people on the scene, you're going to have more and more chaos. Right. So the parking trucks a few blocks away keeps them close, like it keeps the resources close if you need extra assistance, but they're not involved right away. And just how they sort of like process through something, and then actually how they reflect afterwards. You know, we have post-incident reviews, and looking through that and kind of having these different roles during an incident, I think are incredibly useful, especially if you can practice this as a company or an engineering organization and have different people play different roles, right? There's no reason that your most junior engineer shouldn't be able to be an incident commander. If you have the tools and the run books or whatever, the documentation to kind of guide them through that. So I think it's a really good exercise.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software engineering firm and Microsoft Gold partner, empowering development teams to be their best. ClearMeasure equips developers with the DevOps tools, methods, and automation necessary to focus on building their applications, rather than wrestling with builds, deployments, or environments. Click clear-measure.com to see whether a DevOps implementation is for you.
Some quick announcements before we get back to the show. For anyone using Azure DevOps Services, Octopus Deploy, or Redgate SQL Change Automation, or any mix of .NET DevOps tools and platforms, I'm offering free inspections. In my work at ClearMeasure, I have a 30-point DevOps inspection that looks at 30 distinct points across the 7 key areas of a DevOps environment. So just go ahead and email me at jeffrey@clear-measure.com. That's JEFFREY. If you'd like to take advantage of that and like me to take a look at your DevOps environment. You know, that's a fascinating point. There's so many help desk and ticketing systems, or the broader array of incident management systems that all allow you to create a ticket and then journal what's happening, but none of them are a drop-in process like you mentioned. You kind of have to configure for themselves. They probably get to the dispatching stage. A fire's been reported. Now let's dispatch it to somebody. And then after that, it's just notes.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. There is a PagerDuty was the sort of dispatch. They'll like get you to a certain point. They do a great job of that. They also have a lot of resources on how to like handle a post-incident review. VictorOps as well, I should say, now Splunk. But yeah, I think, you know, I don't know that anyone sort of nailed a process. And part of the problem with that is it's not super clean, right? Like there's so many factors that go into it. Certainly if someone's interested, John Alspaugh is someone who you should look into. He does a lot of work around this. Same with Paul Reed. He does all this sorts of talks on airplane incidents and things like that. So that's always fun. But yeah, it's a hard problem to solve. Yeah,
for sure. But I think any of these vendors that get this process baked in, they can certainly sell a whole bunch of user accounts.
Yeah, I was just reflecting the other day about how like the concepts we come up with, like DevOps, get sort of capitalized and monetized by different groups, and where along the adoption cycle that happens. You know, it's just kind of like I feel like Agile went through that. You know, at this point, Agile feels like, you know, a lot of consultants. And so then like, where is DevOps? Because DevOps means at this point, so many different things to so many different people, and kind of creating that, you know, one definition is really difficult.
Well, Agile, I remember when that came out, and there was a cadre of people that says this is what it means, and this is what we believe. These are our statements as a definition.
Had a manifesto.
AgileManifesto.org, which if anyone listening, if your team does Scrum or if you say you do Agile, make sure that you have read the text at AgileManifesto.org. Now, fast forward to DevOps. We have the Phoenix project, and we have the original event in 2010 where the term DevOps was first used, but I don't think we have a defining document that is short. The Phoenix project is a whole book. Now there's the three ways: flow, feedback, and continuous learning. But I don't know about you, but when people tell me, "Hey, we're doing DevOps," I say, "Well, what does that mean? How are you doing on feedback?" Well, no. Let me talk about continuous integration. Because it's easy to jump to a technical practice before we talk about architecture, which architecture is meeting a business objective with some type of design, and process design is part of that. But absolutely. But I don't think we're ever going to get there unless we come back to some type of defining document as an industry. And the vendors all want to make money, and so they solve parts of the problem, and that's good.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. And there are incredible technical solutions for some of this, but I worry that DevOps has become synonymous with CI/CD in some circles. Mm-hmm. And that's just one piece of it, And if going back to your first question with the book, it's like, how do you set this up? And the path I chose was to first talk about company culture and persuading, making sure that you have executive buy-in, making sure that the engineers understand how this could benefit them, and getting that sort of grassroots lift. I actually suggest that convincing the middle managers last is fine, because they kind of get squeezed. Like being a middle manager is a tough go. You have to kind of balance all these forces. But then kind of looking at like, okay, how do you track data? How do you even measure your improvements? Like, what do you look at first? And making that, resource not overwhelming. Like, you don't need to track every single thing in your system, right? Your logs would be insane. And so kind of looking from there. And then I look at the software development lifecycle as a linear process. And you kind of go from, your design to your development, to your testing, to your deploying, to your maintaining. And then in the next section, I kind of take that line and I connect the two ends into a circle, to where you're creating this feedback loop and this rapid iteration, but you're centering the customer. Like a feature that doesn't impact the customer, does that matter? Is that important? Is that something you should be prioritizing? Really kind of looking at that. So yeah, I hope that helps some people.
Right. I think once people understand the process, they can put the tools into the process.
Yes. But you have to understand what are you trying to solve? A lot of times people skip over what is the problem here, to actually kind of like distilling, okay, what is the actual issue we are trying to solve? And they jump to a solution, and that solution is, always they're great. Like Azure DevOps is great. GitHub Actions is great. But what are you trying to solve with that? Because if you automate a process before you actually fully understand it, you're going to automate all the problems in that process, right, and abstract them and make it more difficult to find.
Right. And one of the, I'm curious what your take on this is, but I believe it was Stack Overflow's latest development survey. It showed that over the last 6 or 7 years, we have twice as many programmers in the industry as we used to, just from the massive growth. Not that the older people are leaving mm-hmm. or retiring at any faster rate, but just the massive influx. And so what that means is that 6 or 7 years ago, these people were not in the field. 50% of the people. So you look around, you split the room in half, 50% were not in the field. And so any industry influx or change that happened more than 6 or 7 years ago, then the question is, okay, did they study it in any coursework or classes, or is it just ancient history? And I think that's the case. There's things that that happened in the 90s, and the PMBOK was huge. There's things that happened around the Agile Manifesto era and that change and Scrum's rise. And even, there's things that happened in the 60s that Fred Brooks wrote about that unless you read his stuff, you don't know because no, we weren't there in the 60s.
We'll get that time machine eventually.
Right.
No, you bring up a really good point. And this is something I also noodle with as just an industry. I'm someone who came in, as you said, recently. So I miss a lot of the lived in experience and context that you have had, and I think that knowledge is so rich and so important to kind of inform decisions that we make today. I worry not that there's, I think it's fantastic that we have a totally different generation and a lot more non-traditional people in tech right now. I think code schools have been such a blessing in that way.
And there's a lot of them. Yeah.
Yeah, we have so many. And I think it's beautiful because you take people who, for me, I never considered computer science because I thought you needed math. And, I had a math teacher in high school call me stupid. And at that point, I was just like, and so I went to the thing that I loved and made me feel good. And it's the humanities. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of brilliant minds in tech that have humanities degrees. But I think we sort of, through our issues as an industry in like the 80s, early 90s, where we kind of made this a culture where young men could thrive, specifically young white men could thrive. And we made it not as friendly to other people. And so code schools are solving that issue, but the repercussion of that is that you do have an influx of people who come in without a lot of that rich experience. And so in many ways, I think we need each other, and respecting all pathways into tech and all experiences. You can bring me that sort of that lived knowledge, and tell me things that I just don't know, haven't even fathomed. And then I can bring a different perspective because I come from a totally different industry, a totally different way of thinking. And so, I hope that we are building a culture where all of those experiences and all of that skill set is respected and celebrated.
Well, it's bound to happen because it's growing. It's twice as big as it was just a short. And so when the industry is shrinking, that's a hard place to be. And that's when people get really protective because there's fewer and fewer roles when it's shrinking. But you can't control growth. So everybody's coming, they're getting in, and the barriers to entry are getting lower and lower, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask one of the things that you mentioned was continuous integration and how people are equating DevOps to continuous integration. And I myself point people to the 2006, 2007 book from Addison Wesley. It was titled Continuous Integration because a lot of people hadn't read it. But what other practices do people tend to just automatically reach for when they say, oh, we're doing DevOps?
That's an interesting question. I think another, like you see this in incident management. I think, we'll hold a postmortem, but the process is rote and it loses a lot of the actual moments where you would discover some of the issues in your socio-technical system that exist. And part of that is the humans. It's not necessarily human error, but it's, we are special and we run these systems, and humans are complex, just like our system. So, I see that a lot. It's like, oh, well, we do postmortems. Okay, well, how do you do that? Like, tell me more about that. Just like you were saying with, oh, you do DevOps. Okay, what does that mean exactly? I think another thing you see, and this is somewhat related to how we plan in an Agile environment or the sort of, bastard child of what Agile has become, where you it's like you get everyone into a room and your t-shirt sizing features. And it's like, okay, this meeting is very expensive. Like if you add up all our salaries and the hours we're sitting here arguing, is that really a good use of time? my other sort of tangentially, I think a lot of companies, we skip over the architecture phase. Being a software architect, do you know anyone else who has that title still? Like that, I feel like that has disappeared in many ways.
You bring up a great point on that. Yeah.
Yeah. We're expecting developers to be architects in real time, right? It's like, well, you'll just figure this out as you go, but that doesn't work. At least it doesn't work for me. I can't do that. Right. And so you're not thinking about, okay, well, how does this all fit together? Are you thinking about deploying before you've even written code? Like how do you kind of, like planning is difficult. And this is where you get into, I think, the real benefit of a DevOps process is if you condense that, if you make that cycle shorter, then you're going to be able to iterate and actually, you will make mistakes, but those mistakes will be less expensive.
Yeah. Every other industry that I've studied even briefly that has a massive expansion event has had bad things that happen. For instance, when and I haven't studied other countries, but in the US, when the major bridges over rivers were getting constructed, when the whole of the US was finally settled and whatnot, bridges would collapse because people who did construction work would just build the bridges. And then that industry realized, oh, we need structural engineers to do the important design work so that the people nailing and screwing the wood together or the steel, they know a design that's actually going to stand up. Same thing with electrification. There was a lot of people who could run wires, but now it's much more mature. There are electrical engineers who specify the important parts, and then there are the electricians that can run the lines and conform to standards. Yeah. And I think we're in our industry, we've doubled over the last 6 or 7 years. We're in an expansion period, and the dust has to settle, and maybe some really bad projects have to happen. We've had, I guess there's a few that have made the news that have been really bad billion-dollar software projects that have gotten people's attention. But you're right. We need, as an industry, to figure out what the normal responsibilities of an architect are, and that we can't just say, you developer, I declare you the architect, and then expect it to go well. Because in every industry that I've seen, an architecture produces drawings and multiple sets of drawings that help to align every person working on the thing that is being built so that there's no confusion about what we're building and what it's going to look like when we're done.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And concern and then hope. My concern is because we are creating this culture where in tech, I don't think we view all the pieces of the puzzle equally. We have this sort of stack ranked hierarchy of I'll pick on Google. It's you have your SREs, and then you have your engineers, and then you have everyone else. And when you create a culture where people are equal, I think you create room for people to, okay, I'm going to specialize in this, and this is going to be my thing, and that's okay. I wonder sometimes if we, with your example of you have these structural engineers, and you have the construction workers. Well, does that mean that an architect is going to be higher ranked than a developer because the developer is just slinging code, and it's not, I'm not saying that was at all your intent, but how we kind of think about things, there's a many repercussions to how we set up our industry and how we kind of treat each other. So yeah, I'm curious where we go.
I think it's experience. And it's not a better or worse, it's a progression. For instance, somebody in construction, if I'm a teenager and I want to go into construction as a career and want to start my own construction company one day or whatnot, I may be perfectly qualified to do every role to build a chicken coop. I'm a teenager, right? I've only read a magazine article on construction at that point, but I could be qualified to do that scale. But you're not going to put me in charge of a skyscraper, and you're probably not going to put someone who's 5 or 10 years into the industry in charge of a skyscraper. We're going to get the person who's done as many other big construction projects leading up to it because there are high stakes. And so there's a scale there. And at every different level of experience is probably qualified for something at a certain scale.
Yeah. And making sure that construction worker can become, a structural engineer, I think is part of that. So making sure that there can be a progression and we have that sort of equality and equity. My hope is, I think a recession's coming. I think I'm not alone in that. And I don't think tech's going anywhere, but I do think there's going to be a little bit of a constriction. And it'll be interesting to see how organizations prioritize in that constriction and kind of, I think when you remove some resources and you create constraints, that's when creativity can really thrive. And that's where you you get this sort of purity of, okay, well, here's what we need to do. This sort of clarity around your priorities. So I'm curious how things go over the next year or two.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point about constraints. As management can impose constraints that actually benefit. So even if by choice, but before we close the interview, I just wanted to ask you about modern operations. Yeah. You coined this term, and you lead the quote modern operations team in cloud advocacy at Microsoft. So if you could define what makes operations modern, what should people look for?
Yeah, me and my team kind of came up with this, and it has. We're not 100% in love with it, but it was a way of creating a container around different specialties within operations. So DevOps and SRE, also kind of tagging in security and thinking about how you actually build that into your whole system, like DevSecOps and moving security left. And so, yeah, it's just a way of kind of describing all of those activities and how they fit within the larger development lifecycle. So how do you actually kind of inject these operations mindsets even earlier in the process, like we were talking about, where you have this iteration around the customer.
Okay, awesome. I look forward to seeing more fruits from that team.
Yes, no, I have a stellar team, so I'm excited to see what we do this year.
Yeah, well, and I've seen those more and more teams in that flavor growing at Microsoft, which is awesome to see.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. No, Microsoft is prioritizing reliability strongly right now. And so we're trying to think about, okay, well, how do we talk about reliability internally and externally? And how do we improve in that area? It's like we have these brilliant people. Niall Murphy comes to mind, one of the authors of Google SRE book. And so, okay, how do we apply these people's brains to make our products and our messaging better?
Awesome. Well, before we go, are there any resources that you might point people to, including your book, for people who want to dig in more onto what we've talked about today?
Yeah, definitely read my book. I am hoping, we were talking before, I'm working on a video series, kind of digging into the DevOps concepts and how to kind of get started on your journey or improve your journey, depending on your organization. So I'm excited about that. And then I'm always running around the world speaking. So you can see me at a bunch of the Ignite, the tours over the next few months through Microsoft. But yeah. You can definitely, and follow me on Twitter, Editing Emily.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll include that in the show notes as well. And man, this is a great conversation. I'm fascinated just listening and learning from you. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And we'll put all this stuff in the show notes. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.